You're listening to the Fooled by the Root podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is your host, Heidi Marble. I am so excited to welcome Dr. Joyce Maguire Pavao on our podcast today. I learned about Joyce's work through the amazing Anne Heffron, and I wanted to read you Joyce's bio before we sink into conversation. Dr. Joyce Maguire Pavao was the founder and CEO of the Center for Family Connections Incorporated in Cambridge and New York, founder and director of Riverside After Adoption Consulting and Training, and PACT, Pre-Post Adoption Consulting and Training, from 1982 to the present, and Pavao Consulting and Coaching. Dr. Pavao has done extensive training both nationally and internationally. She is a lecturer in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, and she has consulted to various public and private child welfare agencies, adoption agencies, schools, and community groups, as well as probate and family court judges, lawyers, and clergy. Additionally, she has worked closely with individuals and families touched by adoption, foster care, and other complex blended family constructions. She has developed models for treatment and for training using her systemic, intergenerational, and developmental framework, the normative crisis and development of the adopted family, and her book, The Family of Adoption, has received high acclaim. Dr. Pavao has received many awards and honors. Well, Dr. Pavao, it is such a treat to have you here today. Thank you so much. I've so enjoyed getting to know you through our other conversations as well.
It's a pleasure to be here, Heidi.
Oh, well, I just want to jump right in with your book, The Family of Adoption. In your preface, this is the first thing that you said. A young teenage girl kept a huge secret. She never told her boyfriend. She never told her best friend. She never told her mother she was pregnant. The day of the birth, she had cramps, and her 6-year-old sister was sent to get help because they thought she had appendicitis. And I am the appendix. I am the secret. So can we start at the beginning? Because clearly there's a genesis for the work that you do. What can you tell us about your adoption story?
Well, let's see. I'll give you the very abbreviated version. And I love the idea that I was the appendix. When I met my aunt and she told me that story, I loved it. And let's see how to begin. These are, when I run groups for adoptees, and there are maybe 8 people in the group, and you want to make sure everyone has time to say a little bit about their story. It's so hard to figure out which part of it you're going to tell. Well, I was born in 1946 in the dark ages. So it was a long, long time ago. And it was closed. Everything was closed. And, I had a very lovely adoptive family. I was given all kinds of advantages. I had a sister who was 6 years older than me, who was also adopted. And I never felt like this was quite right. There was something always a little off. And I was a searcher. And I usually, when I'm working with kids, I can tell which ones are searchers and which ones are not. And there's no judgment about being one or not being one. There are advantages to both. But I was curious, and my mother used to blame a lot of my anger issues and my curiosity on my red hair. Come to find out, it probably had something to do with my red hair, but it had a lot to do with being adopted. And wondering. So I would ask really difficult questions. And now we're in the 1950s. And, everything is a secret in the 50s. You never say the word cancer out loud. You can't even say the word asthma. It's, anything is off. You just can't do it. So people didn't talk, and people didn't talk to children. And I think that it just made me angry and more curious to want to know what's going on here. What aren't you guys telling me? How come I don't look like you? How come no one else has red hair? What's happening here? So I would ask a lot of questions, and the answers would be Oh, don't worry, dear, pass the butter. And so, it would be really evading the question. Long story short, I always wanted to know what was what, and I got together with some adoptees after I had begun work in the field, and we started to approach, the legal system to see about some changes. I felt like it was really important that I do work in this field because it wasn't a field. When I was at Harvard, my advisor said to me, Joyce, I have really bad news for you. There's no psychology of adoption. You've made this your focus, and it doesn't exist. And I said to him, I'm sorry, it exists, and I'm proof of it, and I'm going to study it. And so I made it my thing. And there wasn't a lot going on in psychology or mental health around adoption. There were very wonderful people who I became extremely close to. Betty Jean Lifton was one of my dear friends, and Annette Barron was one of my dear friends. There were, a lot of people doing very good writing about adoption and thinking about it, but putting it into practice wasn't happening. And because there was a lot of opposition to doing anything to change what was going on. So I just made it my work, and I started clinics. I trained people, and I did very strange things that weren't regular. I mean, my clinic was not at all cost effective in many ways because I believed that you couldn't train in adoption competency without sitting in with some senior clinicians and learning more about the language and how it's talked about and how to work with adoptive parents, birth parents, and adopted people from childhood to adulthood and beyond. Insurance companies want you to see people individually so you can charge. If you have two clinicians in the room doing the work, you're only allowed to charge for one. And so there were all these difficulties. But I think we've moved things. I've started curriculum to train people to be adoption competent. Gary Mallon in New York and I taught at Hunter Graduate School of Social Work a year-long postgraduate course that's now been rolled into some of the other things that are happening in the country. But we're not, really, there's still so much work to do. It's appalling how little has changed in some areas, and it's exciting how much has changed in others. And I think the internet and podcasts and the things that are happening today are wonderful in terms of advancing discussion, understanding, and, so I diverged a little bit away from me, and I just don't want to focus on me too much, but I don't have any problem if you ask questions. I did find my birth family in my early 20s, late teens. And my birth mother had married and had 6 boys and a girl after me. And I have an amazing birth family. We do, their name is Fitzgerald, and we do Fitzgiving every year, but we missed it last year because of COVID. So Thanksgiving is a wonderful holiday where we all get together, and, it's just great. And my adoptive family, my adoptive parents were much older when they got me. And so they're long gone. And I have a cousin who I'm very close to. So I stay, 2 cousins actually who I'm close to. So I stay connected to my adoptive family also.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that, Joyce, and telling us a little bit about your personal journey. You are definitely a pioneer, and you deserve so much respect for that. So I just want to take a moment and let everyone applaud you, because this work is not easy. And the fact that you've been doing it for your lifetime is incredible.
It shows how crazy I am, Heidi.
Well, you know what? You're in good company, because I think crazy people are fun. That's my opinion. I was sitting with your book last night in front of the fireplace, and I read this poem, and I just think it'd be really great to read it right now. And then I want to talk to you about it.
Sure.
This is from your book. You cannot change the truth. These are your children, but they came from somewhere else. And they are the children of those places and of those people as well. Help them to know about their past and about their present. Help them to know that they are from extended families, that they have only one parent or set of parents, but they have more mothers and fathers. They have grandmothers and godmothers and birth mothers and mother countries and Mother Earth. They have grandfathers, godfathers, birth fathers, fatherlands. They have family by birth and by adoption. They have family by choice and by chance. Childhood is short. They are our children to raise. They are our children to love. They are citizens of the world. What we do to them creates the world that we live in. Give them life, give them truth, give them love, give them all they came with. Give them all they can grow with. Your children do not belong to you, but they belong with you. You cannot keep them from what is theirs, but you can keep loving them. You do not own your children, but they are your own.
I wrote that at a time, I don't even remember when, sometime in the 80s, I think. And I wrote it because my work at that point was trying to help the little adoptees who were growing up in adoptive families by helping their parents to realize how important it is to incorporate and to embrace their birth family, their birth culture, their birth race. And so it was during the 80s that we started doing more and more work around open adoption. And unfortunately, I'm still working to fix some of the open adoptions that were done in this country. They were meant to be open adoptions, but they're what I would call semi-open. There was a meeting at the time of placement between the adults or the teenager, in case of some of the birth parents or first parents. I want to say a quick thing about language. I came up in the era when Lee Campbell and a lot of the Cub birth mothers decided on the name birth mother. They didn't want to be called natural mothers because they thought that seemed weird. They didn't want to be called biological mothers at all because they felt like that was too distant and sterile. And they decided they had given birth and they wanted to be the birth mother. Now, since then, a lot of birth mothers prefer to be called first mothers or just mothers. I completely support all of that, but I fall back into my old language sometimes. I don't want to offend anyone, and I want you to know that behind this, I totally appreciate everything about that, but I just, fall into that many times. So where was I?
Well, we were just talking about the poem, and one of the things that stood out to me was the divided loyalty that an adopted person has to feel if the people around them aren't accepting of who they are. And so they have to ride this fence in life. And it's so dangerous to our well-being. And I wonder if you could speak to our audience about that, because I think your poem is asking, please accept the adopted child, all of the things that come with that child. The blank slate doesn't work.
Yeah.
These children come with a history. So I just love to hear your thoughts on the consequences of that divided loyalty.
Well, I think that there is going to be some divided loyalty in any situation where children are split, in marriage and divorce and families that aren't adopted. You see it in many different instances, but I think it's just there in adoption. And it also has something to do with the messages from society. There is a misunderstanding on the part of the general public about how wonderful the adopting family is to have saved and rescued this child. And, in some instances, a piece of that may be true, but nobody wants to be grateful for something that doesn't feel wonderful, that's complicated, that's complex. And people tend to feel negatively toward birth families. And well, you know, even kids. I had a little boy. These stories are in the book too. A little boy adopted from Korea, who was doing a project, and he decided to do it on Korea. So he sat down at the kitchen table with his mom, and he said, "Mom, I understand from what you told me that my birth mother couldn't really keep me safe or take care of me. But wasn't there anyone else in that whole country who could have cared for me?"
Oh my goodness.
I know. And so that's how kids think. And that's how we think sometimes. And, you know, there was no way that could have happened because Korea didn't, at that point in time, they do now, but they didn't do adoptions in that way. And these were children, for the most part, post-war. Some of them in the first waves were post-war, and they might have been mixed race. And that was not fully accepted. So there were many, many reasons, but it's just very complicated what happens and how the divided loyalty about your country, about your race, about your culture, about your religion, about your ethnicity. There are so many aspects of yourself that are torn, and you're trying to figure out who you are in the midst of that. And I think the more we can do, you know, I mean, obviously, there are many adoptions that shouldn't happen at all. There are many children who should not be removed from their families of origin. I don't believe you should remove a child because of poverty. Do something to uplift that family and give them what they need. So, and there's a lot of child trafficking that happens under the name of adoption. There are, you know, many countries have shut down their adoption programs because they've learned that people realize this is a way to make a lot of money. The business of adoption is not good at all. And I think the word adoption gets used as a blanket. And it's unfortunate because people fight about, oh, that's not true. Adoption doesn't do that. Aspects of adoption do a lot of different things, and some of them are wonderful and some of them are terrible. And we haven't learned how to turn that around. There will always be some children who cannot be raised by their birth families and who need to be in a family. I don't think an institutional upbringing is a good place for a child. So adoption has always happened and will always happen, but it shouldn't be a business. It shouldn't be encouraged when it's not the right thing to do. And I think that's something that we really need to learn. And we need to do things differently. We need to help people to understand that they're connected. This child is connected to both of those families, and you can't separate that. Even if there's been a dangerous situation, there can be ways to stay connected, to learn things, and to be able to integrate that and make sense of it and not feel split. Betty Jean Lifton always talked about the split that happens. And really, that's what causes a lot of the mental illness that you see in many adoptees, is that split. And it really needs to be something that happens.
I agree, Dr. Pavao. Thank you so much for that. And I'd love to spend the balance of our interview speaking to adopted people who are trying to find ways to heal. And one of the things that you said is that empathy can help us grow and heal. And I believe that because I can speak for myself. I've had a lot of anger toward my birth mother for giving me up, toward my adopted mother for not doing the right things. And it's entirely exhausting, and it's justified, obviously. But I think the empathy part, it really plays an important role. And I'd love for maybe you to talk from your expertise to speak to us about these very normal and heavy emotions that we have to feel, and how do we progress?
I think that there are stages of development that you go through over and over again, and stages of grief and loss that you go through over and over again. I think that at certain stages, adoptees have to be angry. And and birth parents go through it also. Adoptive parents do too around the time of their infertility. I mean, there's so much pain in all of those parties that it's, and we haven't given it enough attention to see how it impacts the child. But I think it's a stage, and it gets labeled as, oh, you're an angry adoptee. And you do have to go through that anger. Anger is a cover. It's a very funny emotion. It covers sadness or shame. If you dig deep enough into anger, you get to sadness and shame. And I think people are more comfortable being angry. Anger is movement. When you're angry, you're not stuck. But when you're sad, you can be catatonic, and you can feel like you're never going to stop crying, that it's never going to end. And if you're dealing with shame, you can feel, that you don't want to go there. You don't want to stay there. So I think it's hard to get out of some of those stages, and it's important to go through them and maybe to cycle through them a few times, but not to really see people as their emotion. And I think that, what I used to say all the time is behavior is the language of children. They can't tell you how they feel, but they act it out, and it drives you crazy. Well, adults do the same thing sometimes. They really do. And I think what you want is a Sherpa. You want a good guide, a good therapist who is adoption competent, and who isn't going to judge you and say, oh my God, she must be, bipolar. I mean, people take these diagnoses and they look them up on the internet and throw them around without any training or any understanding. I had a dad come in to see me once about his 12-year-old daughter, who I'd known since she was 4. And he said, Margaret is bipolar. I looked it up on the internet. She has 4 of the 5 indicators, and she is definitely bipolar. And I said to him, Margaret's 12. All 12-year-old girls are bipolar. What are you talking about? It's one of the most important things is getting parents and adults off of this pathologizing thing. They want to find something wrong so they can fix it. They have good intentions. They want it to be fixed. But it's not good to pathologize this kid. It just doesn't help anything. So it's very important to figure out that you're going to go through these cycles. You're never going to be free and clear of what you've had, the traumas you've had from the beginning, but you're going to manage them better. You're going to learn how to handle them. You're going to find the people who can guide you through them in different ways. And that's really the best we can do. And there are some great things about adoption. You get to reinvent yourself. There are some things, some of the most creative, Steve Jobs, you could name millions of adoptees who are very inventive, who have done some incredibly creative things. And, part of that comes from them creating their own vision of themselves because they weren't given the role models to see who they were. And I think that, we have to look at that. I mean, not that you would choose that, but if you've got it, go with it. This is your life. You don't get to go back and make it different. You really need to figure out how to incorporate it, how to love aspects of yourself, and how to be clear that if there's abuse and if there's trauma, it's real, and you don't need to embrace that. You need to acknowledge it and take care of yourself in the process.
Wow. We had talked about healing being personal, and I really love what you just said, because the cycles that we go through, and all of us approach it a little bit differently. Obviously, there's universal themes, and having a guide and being able to take our gifts and talents and our pain and create something positive in the world will give meaning to what happened. And I think anyone that's been through something difficult that can turn it into meaning, as you have with your work, I can't imagine how satisfying it's been for you to be able to spread so much knowledge and create change. It just has to be amazing. So I was thinking about hope. I know that that's a really loaded word, but a lot of people, like, let's just say they're in this cycle and they're deeply sad in that catatonic state. I know this is a personal question, but have you ever felt that way? And how did you pull yourself out of that?
You know, to be very, very honest, I've certainly, I label these things. I've been in the heights of depression, but I've never been in the depths of depression. And I've sat with many, many, many people who have been in the depths of depression. And so I don't know what it's like for them other than my guiding them and being there for them. And you're absolutely right. Some of this, though, I think this is another situation where we have to look at the combination of nature, nurture. You know, your disposition, your whole personality, your whole neurological makeup. You can't just think that away. You can't. And I've sat with so many people who want to fix their own depression by thinking about it. It's there. It's not something you can think about. It's physiological. It's neurological. And sometimes I'm not one to be heavy into medicating people, especially children. But sometimes if you've got a chemical disorder, you need a chemical fix. And it needs to be done very carefully by someone very knowledgeable. And it's not always the case. So I've given kids prescriptions for track or football because physical activity changes your neurology. There are things that change your neurology, and you don't need to be taking medication all the time for everything. I think this may be very personal, but I think I'm pretty ADD. In my old age, I don't think I am as much as I was, but you know, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's another situation where you're very multitasking and creative while you're also a little crazy looking to the rest of the world. You know what you're doing and how you can balance it all. So I don't think everyone needs medication for ADD. I think some people need to learn to use it very well. I like the books by Ned Hallowell, who is a great psychiatrist in this area. And he wrote a book called Driven to Distraction about ADD, ADHD. He has ADD and he's brilliant. And so I think it's really important to look at what's going on and to understand it. It is biological, it is physiological. And sometimes if it gets in the way of the quality of your life, you need to do something, maybe medication, maybe more. If you're, if you're that depressed and your life is at risk, you need to do more. I mean, there's something that will help you. But sometimes there are things you can do to help yourself. And you can't just do it by thinking, I'm going to be happy today. It doesn't work. Your body isn't happy today. So I think people need to understand that and need to make sense of it for themselves so that they realize when they need help and what kind of help they need. And there are so many good evidence-based EMDR. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things other than medication that can help with trauma and other things that are going on. So, you started this off by asking me about hope. I love the word hope. And one of the things that I used to do in my clinic, I don't know if you know Penny Callan Partridge. Do you know Penny?
I believe I've heard that name, but I don't know the specifics.
You should have her on your show because
I would love to. Come on, Penny.
We used to call Penny the poet laureate of adoption because she's a poet and she's an adoptee, and she wrote these amazing poems. And she and I used to teach a writing class, and we'd read 3 fairy tales, 3 stories, myths, fairy tales, Bible stories, and then ask people to take that story and apply it to themselves or use it in some way. And one of the stories was Pandora. And I don't know if you remember, but Pandora's story is very scary. You know, everyone warns her not to open the box. It's filled with evil things and they fly out and they're scary. And then Pandora, what no one really remembers this last part. At the very end, she's asked to open the box one more time. And at the bottom of the box is hope. And Penny and I have given each other these little boxes that have Pandora on them. And when you open it, it says hope on the bottom. And I think hope is really important. It's so important to hold on to it and to keep sorting through. This is true in all of the search and reunion work that I've done over the years. You know, a lot of crazy things can fly out. You can be rejected, re-rejected. You can find people deceased. You can have missed them by 10 minutes. I mean, there's like unbelievable, sad stories that have gone on for people, but you can't stop there. There's more to search for. There's more to figure out. And at the bottom of it is hope.
Beautiful. I love that, because I think you're right. We all stop at the opening of Pandora's box. We're so busy looking at all the scary things flying out. We don't think to look a little deeper for that place of hope. And I think what I'm hearing you say is just not to give up and to keep trying and to keep looking for things that will be helpful to you in your healing journey. I appreciate all of those suggestions. As we get ready to wrap up the interview, I know you've been out there a lot and you've talked to so many people, but is there anything that you really want to sink into that is important to you, that's on your heart and your mind, that you want to emphasize?
I think we really need to understand that the trauma that everyone in adoption has experienced is real. And the loss is very real. And, I've been guilty of this too. It's very easy to react to people. And there's a very difficult community in the adoption world, and has been for 50 years that I've been in it working. There's a lot of rejection and a lot of I'm right and you're not. This is my experience, so it's the experience. I just think people have to open up and realize that there are so many different stories. There are multiple realities in adoption, multiple realities. And we're all dealing with all of these things. And it's very hard to be your best possible self all the time. You can't be. So just be aware of that and try to think about it in terms of interactions with each other. I think that's very important. And the other thing I would say is, and this has always been my focus, it's one thing to try to change things politically, and I think we should do that. I have major problems with the business of adoption, and I've tried very hard and will continue till my dying day to try to change some of the things we do in child welfare and foster care and international and domestic adoptions. Absolutely need change. And we have to keep growing and making a difference in those areas. But meanwhile, there are kids growing up in families, and we have to take care of them. I use this example. I don't know, maybe in the early 90s. I did these conferences every summer on Cape Cod. And one year, and we had people from all over the world that would come to them. And one year there were these British people, and they were, and they and some of our Americans were totally against transracial adoption, totally against it, really avid, crazy, forceful against. Now, personally, I think all children should be kept with their birth family or extended family if possible. If they can't, they should be kept in their community, extended community, including race. I mean, these are going to be mirrors to them, and they're going to. So I don't disagree with having us make an effort. I don't think we shouldn't do transracial adoptions ever, but I think we don't give enough thought to keeping kids connected. And so I don't disagree with them. But what I said was, you really need to make a choice. Are you going to work politically, or are you going to be a therapist and a clinician and work with families? If you're going to work with families, you can't tell the parents who are here at this conference to learn that they shouldn't exist. You can't tell gay and lesbian parents that they shouldn't exist. They're not a real family. You can't do that to the kids. You're breaking up their only foundation if you're doing that, because that's where they live right now. That's who they are right now. So I constantly try to think about the children and how we can do a much better job of helping parents, both birth and adoptive, to talk to kids, to help them to understand, to integrate all this information, to support them, and to deal with our own feelings somewhere else. And there isn't enough of that. The adoptive parents and the birth parents need to get their own, I mean, they have legitimate loss and trauma also, and they need to work on that, and they don't need to have it siphoned down to the kids. So, I think it's a juggling act, and it's very difficult, but I really worry for the kids. I think we know now, as the adults who went through this and are out of the fog and are thinking about things differently and understand things, we have a responsibility, because we know that, to help in the ways that we can help. And you can't do it with a bat over their head. You have to get in there and help people to understand. You have to do psychoeducation. You have to bring them along. You have to get them to listen to conferences, to TV shows, there are lots of good ways to do this. This new Colin in Black and White about Colin Kaepernick is
yes.
There are so many good things that you could sit and watch and then talk about. It gives you an opportunity to have more conversations with kids, and I think that's important. So,
Dr. Pavao, that was incredible. And I think that sometimes the people that are so upset, they have every right to be, but you're absolutely right. The focus should be the child, and what is that going to do to the child who is currently living in that situation? And how do we tenderly unfold all of those layers so that they're not further damaged? That is such a powerful point. You have made so many powerful points. I can't thank you enough for your time. We so appreciate the good you have done in our world and in our community, Dr. Pavao. And personally, I love that you have red hair and ADHD.
Well, it was great to spend time with you, Heidi. And, your work is really commendable. It's really wonderful. The more you can give this a voice and get people to hear different perspectives, and it's just wonderful. So keep it up.
I'm going to, and you keep it up too. Thank you, Dr. Pavao.
You take care.
Thank you.